It's Maurice's turn now, Brother Mo. Over here.
This is my turn to do a solo.
They called him the Quiet BG. While Barry commanded the stage with a falsetto that soared, and Robin carried the drama with that haunting quiver in his voice, Maurice Gibb stayed in the shadows. He was the glue that held the Bee Gees together, the brother who gave more than he ever asked for in return. But silence doesn't mean absence. Maurice's silence was heavy. It was layered with sacrifices, with secrets, and with a longing that rarely saw the light. Because buried in the Bee Gees' mountain of hits was a song Maurice never wanted the world to hear. A song he treated almost like a wound he couldn't cover up. To him, it wasn't a single, it wasn't a chart climber, it wasn't even entertainment. It was a confession. And when that song finally surfaced, it revealed more about Maurice than any interview, any spotlight, or any polished hit record ever could. Sometimes the song an artist hides is the one that tells the truth. This is RetroWaves, where we uncover the hidden stories behind the legends. If you've ever wondered what secrets lie behind the music that defined entire generations, you're in the right place. Subscribe, join our community, and step with us into the moments the artists themselves wished we'd never see. Because this is the story of the song Maurice Gibb tried to bury, and why it revealed too much to ever be silenced. Maurice Gibb was not just a BG. He was the multi-instrumentalist genius who gave the band its spine. On stage, you might have noticed Barry and Robin standing out front, their voices instantly recognizable. But listen closer, and you'll realize something. The heartbeat underneath it all was Maurice. He played the bass lines that made disco irresistible, the guitar riffs that carried their ballads, the harmonies that stitched everything together like invisible thread. Maurice wasn't there to shine. He was there to hold it all together. Without him, the Bee Gees were two voices fighting for dominance. With him, they were an unstoppable force, but there was a cost. When the spotlight always tilted toward his brothers, Maurice's deepest expressions found no stage. He poured them, instead, into songs that fans rarely knew about. Songs that ended up tucked away in B-sides, hidden in demos, or overshadowed by Barry's soaring falsetto and Robin's theatrical wail. And these weren't ordinary songs. They were personal. Too personal. They revealed the weight Maurice carried as the middle brother, always in between, always filling the silence, always hiding his own scars. Among them was one track that cut deeper than the rest. The song Maurice quietly wished would stay locked away forever, because when you listened, it wasn't just art. It was Maurice, unmatched. Maurice Gibb's role in the Bee Gees was often summed up in one word: the quiet one. But quietness can be deceiving. Behind the jokes he cracked in interviews and the easygoing charm he displayed in public, Maurice was a man divided. His brothers were lightning bolts. Barry with his leadership, Robin with his eccentricity. Maurice, he was the grounding wire, the one who balanced the storm. But balance doesn't mean peace. Deep down, Maurice wrestled with an ache few could see. He questioned his place in the band, in his family, and in the machine that had made them global icons. When he finally stepped to the microphone, on those rare songs where he took the lead, something shifted. The Bee Gees' polished pop sheen gave way to rawness. His voice wasn't soaring like Barry's or trembling like Robin's. It was earthy, vulnerable, confessional, like pages torn from a diary he hadn't meant for anyone to read. That's why his solo tracks always felt different. They weren't built for radio, they weren't meant to fill arenas. They were for Maurice, and maybe for the brothers who understood his silence better than anyone else. But one of those recordings, it revealed too much. It exposed the insecurity he masked with humor. It hinted at the battles with alcohol and loneliness he fought behind closed doors. And it carried the quiet heartbreak of being the middle brother, always vital but never seen as essential. Maurice wanted that song buried, but music has a way of speaking even when its creator falls silent. And that's why, all these years later, it still lingers. like a secret whispered too loud to be taken back. To understand the song Maurice wanted hidden, you have to dig deeper than the Bee Gees' glittering legacy. Everyone remembers the wall of disco hits that lit up the 1970s, Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, How Deep Is Your Love. Those songs built the myth, but Maurice's story lived elsewhere, in the quiet corners of the catalog, far away from the Saturday Night Fever spotlight. By the early 1970s, the Bee Gees were fractured. Fame had been slipping, Robin had quit and come back, and Barry was trying to reinvent their sound. The tension between the two brothers could fill an entire room, and caught in the middle was Maurice, always the diplomat, always the glue. That period gave Maurice an opening. On songs like On Time and Suddenly, he took the microphone and fans heard something they weren't used to, the hidden voice of the Bee Gees. But then came Lay It On Me.
'Cause you know that I'm a loser. I'm proud of that fact.
A song that wasn't written for stardom, wasn't tailored for the charts, and wasn't polished with Bee Gees' perfection. It was raw, stripped, almost uncomfortable in its honesty. Maurice's vocal came through without the protective layers of Barry's falsetto or Robin's quiver. It was Maurice standing naked in front of the listener, his voice carrying weariness and longing, and that was the problem. Because Lay It On Me didn't sound like the Bee Gees the world wanted. It sounded like Maurice Gibb's diary. And diaries aren't meant for mass release. Why would a man who lived for music want to bury his own creation? Maurice had spent his entire career living in contrast to his brothers. Barry was the commander, the leader, the producer, the visionary. Robin was the dramatist, unpredictable, eccentric, poetic. Maurice was the anchor. He filled in the missing chords, glued the harmonies together, played the instruments no one else could, and smoothed the storms when Barry and Robin clashed. But in Lay It On Me, Maurice wasn't just the anchor. He was the one adrift. The lyrics hinted at burdens too heavy for him alone. They spoke of longing, of surrender, of someone quietly asking for help, but terrified of being heard. For Maurice, that was too much exposure. Releasing the track widely would mean admitting that beneath the jokes and the easygoing image, there was a fracture. He didn't want to be seen as the troubled Gibb. He didn't want headlines painting him as weak. He wanted to remain the strong, steady one who kept everything in balance. And so, whenever the song came up, Maurice downplayed it. He brushed it aside, almost as if he hoped people wouldn't notice what was hidden in plain sight. But art doesn't care about comfort. And music has a way of slipping through the cracks. Its creator builds around it. Lay It On Me survived, and with it, Maurice's unspoken confession. To fully understand Maurice's fear, you have to step into the shadows he was living in. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Maurice was losing battles no one saw on stage. Alcohol had become his way of numbing the ache he carried inside. Friends described him as the Joker, always laughing, always entertaining. But when the party ended, the silence returned. And in that silence, Maurice often drank himself into oblivion. The cruel irony was that the very role that defined him, being the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who made everything work, also isolated him. Barry had the spotlight, Robin had the eccentric brilliance, but who was Maurice? He was the middle brother, essential, yet overlooked, vital, yet invisible. That invisibility bled into Lay It On Me. It wasn't just a song about loneliness, it was a coded cry for connection, for recognition, for release. The title itself, Lay It On Me, felt like a plea from a man willing to carry everyone else's weight, but secretly crumbling under his own. Maurice didn't want people to hear that vulnerability. He didn't want the world to know that the smiling Joker in interviews was also the man staring into the bottom of a glass, wondering if anyone truly saw him. But here's the truth about music. It remembers what its maker wants to forget. And in that haunting song, listeners could hear the cracks in Maurice Gibb's armor, cracks he tried desperately to hide. When Lay It On Me finally found its way into the world, it didn't crash in with the force of a hit single. There was no glittering launch, No media fanfare, no screaming fans waiting outside record shops. It didn't arrive like Stayin' Alive or Night Fever, the songs that turned the Bee Gees into global gods. It arrived quietly, almost too quietly, as though it had tiptoed in when no one was watching. And maybe that was the only way it could have existed. Because this song was never meant to fill arenas or dominate airwaves. It was never engineered for disco lights or the flashing bulbs of paparazzi. It was raw, almost uncomfortable in its honesty. A song that felt like it had slipped out of Maurice Gibb's private notebook rather than a recording studio. The first time fans heard it, many didn't know what to make of it. The Bee Gees were known for their seamless harmonies, for their ability to turn heartache into polished pop. But Lay It On Me stripped all of that away. Maurice's voice stood alone, without Barry's falsetto cushioning him, without Robin's quiver adding drama, just Maurice. And Maurice alone was something few people had ever truly heard. It was fragile, almost trembling. His tone didn't reach for perfection. It reached for something else, honesty. The words carried weight, and the pauses carried even more. It felt like listening to a man open a door he had kept locked for years. And that's why it cut so deep. Because for the first time, listeners weren't just hearing a Bee Gee, they were hearing Maurice Gibb, stripped of the armor he had worn his entire career. The contrast with his brothers only sharpened the sting. Barry was the undeniable leader. He could step up to a microphone and command a room of 50,000 people. His falsetto became the sound of the 1970s, a weapon that turned disco into a cultural revolution. Robin, on the other hand, was the eccentric poet. His voice, with its haunting quiver, gave their ballads a sense of theater and tragedy that audiences adored. They were the ones in the spotlight, the ones interviewed, photographed, celebrated. Maurice was different. He was the backbone, the craftsman, the one who played whatever instrument the song demanded, bass guitar, keyboards, even drums when needed. He was the arranger, the harmonizer, the mediator. He was everything, and yet, to the public, he was invisible. And maybe Maurice preferred it that way. Or maybe he told himself he did, because invisibility had become his role. The middle brother who made sure everything else held together. But then came Lay It On Me. And suddenly, the invisibility cracked. Here was Maurice, not the joker in interviews, not the man keeping peace backstage, not the glue in the shadows. Here was Maurice, front and center, with no one to hide behind. And what poured out wasn't polished or glamorous. It was weary, vulnerable, human. Imagine Barry and Robin hearing that track. Barry once admitted that Maurice's songs felt different, more personal, more intimate, as though he was singing straight from his diary. Robin, too, often said Maurice was the balance, the one who kept them from falling apart. But in this song, the balance was gone. What they would have heard was their brother stripped bare, his voice exposing cracks they may have sensed but never fully acknowledged. And for once, Maurice wasn't the glue, he was the wound. That's what made the song so terrifying for Maurice. Because once it was recorded, once it was released, even in the smallest way, the illusion he had built his life around began to crumble. Maurice had perfected the art of the mask. In interviews, he was the joker, the charmer, the one with a quick laugh and an easy smile. To fans, he seemed content, being the quiet one, happy to stand a little behind his brothers. Even within the band, he played the role of mediator, smoothing over the endless battles between Barry and Robin. But Lay It On Me betrayed all of that. It told the truth he worked so hard to hide. In its lyrics, in its tone, in its delivery, the song carried a message he never wanted the world to hear. I'm not fine. I'm not invincible. I'm not just the joker in the background. I'm hurting, and I'm tired of carrying it alone. It wasn't just music. It was a confession. And Maurice knew it. That's why he wanted it buried. He didn't want fans to see him as weak. He didn't want his brothers to look at him differently. He didn't want the press to seize on it as proof that the Bee Gees were unraveling. But music doesn't obey fear. Music has a way of telling the truth. Its creator once silenced, and Lay It On Me became that truth for Maurice. At first, most critics ignored the song. It wasn't a hit, it wasn't played on radio, it wasn't discussed in reviews. It slipped past the industry without making waves. But fans noticed. Not all, but enough. On forums, years later, fans would write about the first time they heard it. Some said it felt like reading someone's diary without permission. Others described it as haunting, uncomfortable, but unforgettable. One fan admitted that it made them cry, not because of the lyrics alone, but because of how fragile Maurice sounded, as though he was carrying a weight too heavy to keep off the record. And when Maurice died in 2003, suddenly the song carried even more weight. Fans returned to it, replayed it, listened differently. What once felt like a quiet, overlooked track now sounded prophetic. Lines that once seemed vague now felt sharp, specific, devastating. The cracks in his voice weren't just performance choices, they were warnings, echoes of a man who carried loneliness and pain behind the smiles he gave the world. That's when Lay It On Me stopped being just a song. It became a monument, a piece of evidence that Maurice's silence had never been empty. It had been full of truths he was too afraid to say aloud, and once fans heard it through that lens, they couldn't unhear it. Maurice never chased the spotlight. He didn't want fame for himself. He wanted harmony, in the studio and in his family. But in a cruel twist, the one moment he truly stepped into the light wasn't by choice, it was by accident. Because Lay It On Me didn't just put Maurice in the spotlight, it exposed him. It revealed the humanity he worked his entire career to keep private. For a man who lived as the backbone, it was the one time he was the heart, and the heart is always the most vulnerable part of all. After Lay It On Me slipped into the Bee Gees' story, Maurice never made a big deal about it. He didn't push it in interviews, didn't fight for it on set lists, didn't revisit it when the band performed. He treated it almost like a ghost, something that existed but something he pretended not to see. But the silence around the song only made it more powerful. For fans, it became a hidden artifact, a piece of music you had to dig for, tucked between the headlines and the mega hits. And when you found it, it felt like stumbling across a secret Maurice had left behind. Then came 2003. Maurice's sudden passing at just 53 years old left the music world stunned. Barry and Robin were shattered. The Bee Gees, the group that had defined an era, were finished. But for fans, the grief had another layer. They began going back, retracing Maurice's footsteps in the music. They searched for him in the songs where he wasn't just the harmony, but the voice. And over, they came back to Lay It On Me. Suddenly, a track that had once been overlooked felt like prophecy. Maurice hadn't spoken much about himself and life, but in this song, he had said everything. And now it sounded like a farewell, not because he intended it that way, but because truth has a way of outliving its speaker. Barry and Robin both admitted, in the years after Maurice's death, that he had been the one who kept them together. Barry described him as the glue. Robin said he was the balance. Neither could deny that Maurice's presence was the reason the Bee Gees survived decades of tension, fame, and reinvention. But what they never said outright was what Lay It On Me proved, that being the glue came at a cost. Barry's falsetto defined an era. Robin's voice told the band's tragedies. But Maurice's hidden track revealed what his brothers never fully said, that he was the one quietly breaking under the weight of it all. You wonder if Barry and Robin ever revisited that song after Maurice was gone. You wonder if they sat in silence, listening to their brother's fragile voice, realizing too late that it had always been telling them the truth. Perhaps they saw it as a warning they hadn't heeded, perhaps they saw it as a wound they could never heal. For fans, it didn't matter what the brothers thought. What mattered was that the world finally listened. And in listening, Maurice was no longer invisible. Today, Maurice Gibb's name often comes up last when people talk about the Bee Gees. Barry is remembered as the superstar, Robin as the eccentric, and Maurice as the quiet one. But fans who know, really know, point to songs like Lay It On Me as proof that Maurice's voice mattered just as much as theirs. That song became a kind of legacy, not because it was a hit, but because it was honest. It revealed the man behind the mask, the man who gave more than he took, the man who never asked for the spotlight, but left behind something brighter than spotlight could ever give. Truth. The Bee Gees will always be tied to disco's rise, to Saturday Night Fever, to the anthems that made the world dance. But Maurice's legacy is quieter. It lives in the cracks, in the rare moments where he stepped forward, in the music he didn't want to be seen, because those were the moments that showed who he really was. Lay It On Me endures not as a hit, but as a confession, and confessions are timeless. Every great band has its mythology. The Beatles had Lennon and McCartney's rivalry. Fleetwood Mac had their tangled romances. The Bee Gees had Barry's falsetto and Robin's drama. But the Bee Gees also had Maurice, the steady middle, the silent strength. And in Lay It On Me, that silence cracked. For listeners, the song became more than just a piece of music. It became a mirror, a reminder that even the ones who seem strongest, even the ones who laugh the loudest, carry battles no one sees. Maurice wasn't just singing for himself, he was singing for everyone who has ever felt invisible, overlooked, or burdened by carrying others while no one carried them. That's why the song still resonates today, because in its fragility, it reveals a truth larger than Maurice himself, that silence is not absence, that quiet people often carry the heaviest weight, and that sometimes the song you try hardest to bury is the one the world needs most. Maurice Gibb never stood in front of crowds demanding attention. He never declared himself the leader. He never fought for the spotlight. But with Lay It On Me, whether he liked it or not, he gave the world his final confession. It wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't even intentional, but it was real. And realness lasts longer than fame. The song Maurice wanted hidden became the one that told the truth. The one that revealed everything he never said. The one that turned the quiet Bee Gee into the most honest of them all. Maurice Gibb's legacy isn't just in the harmonies, the bass lines, or the arrangements that made the Bee Gees immortal. His legacy lives in the song he tried to bury. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need charts or accolades. Sometimes, it only needs to be heard. And that's why, all these years later, Lay It On Me still matters. It matters because it showed us Maurice, not the joker, not the mediator, not the quiet brother, but the man, vulnerable, human, honest. This is RetroWaves, where we uncover the stories the legends never wanted told. If Maurice's truth moved you, imagine what else lies hidden in the shadows of music history. Subscribe and join us as we keep pulling those stories into the light.